it might be time to talk about incisions and Crimes of the Future.
It might indeed be time to talk about both sides of the blade, which goes into the torso of Viggo Mortensen at the start of Crimes of the Future by David Cronenberg, a veteran body horror director who all listeners of any podcast about anything will be familiar with. This film is a potentially quite a bollard in his filmography. it will be
a speed ramp for some.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's made quite a few films that won't be remembered recently. Yeah. And
well, he hasn't made one in 8 years.
Right, but the ones he made before Dangerous Method and
Cosmopolis and so on.
These are not sort of decisive Cronenberg films in the way that The Fly and...
Well, the critique is that he departed from his kind of métier of horror and kind of went into slightly more sort of uneasy societal horror,
exactly.
kind of social horror about LA,
horror.
And he kind of talked about, in terms of Dangerous Method, literally talking about psychoanalysis in a way
which he did
implied,
very badly.
Yeah, implied in a lot of his movies, and I think this is this came with a great deal of hype. The hype train, the PR train of this film was immense. So we actually watched the trailer. I'm kind of like coming around this through the back door. We rewatched the trailer last night in Airbnb, and it implies a very dystopic, uneasy set-piece film in which lots of kind of devices, kind of strange devices, which is what Cronenberg is known for, particularly in Existence, maybe kind of, particularly in Existence, I should say, with these, unusual real props that move a semi-alive, they're kind of physical, technological props, and this takes him back to that territory. But the actual film itself, I found, has set pieces, which are, the set production is incredible. The actual kind of exploration of bodies through them is really interesting, but there are walls of concrete of quite turgid dialogue which kind of intercede between those. So a lot of the film, I was feeling, I think I fell asleep for a few moments during this film.
Dialogue which desperately wants to be in the shoulder to shoulder with more human than human is our motto, and like Tears in the Rain, and
like
these sort of classic.
I've seen things you won't believe.
Yeah, exactly.
But yesterday I saw things I do believe, and they're terrible.
Yeah. Like the lines in Cronenberg feel like they're auditioning for the role of
but that's why it was badly in need of a
script
doctor of some kind, because it was just fumbling in the dark through a series of a lot of gags that fell very flat. For instance, from Viggo Mortensen.
He plays it as a comedic kind of kind of dyspeptic kind of dad.
Body horror dad jokes.
But with a serious kind of Ezra Pound style culling of the script, you could have got get rid of 70% of the lines. There's you have a decent film in there.
Because you've already got to a point where what he doesn't do is provide a great deal of exposition. So in my sense, it felt like one of those I was talking about yesterday. One of those kind of space operas where you're dropped into a shortish panther science fiction novel, and you're given an assumption that the world is this way, it just is, accept it. But this world is also undergoing immense changes, and we enter this film kind of unmoored in this kind of non-place. We see a ship at the beginning that looks kind of like the Costa Concordia. It's like this kind of decayed cruise ship, the end, the death of luxury, I don't know, on this kind of bay. It's a very kind of murky production in terms of composition. A lot of it happens at night in kind of concrete industrial kind of Berghain-esque spaces.
Should we say what the plot is basically?
Yeah, we should probably give a brief.
It is a film set in a sort of dystopian
retro
future. A lot of the technology is actually kind of cathode ray tubes and 16mm cameras, but there is a digital automated surgery process that happens through a kind of a crab-like device called a sark. And this allows people to perform surgeries on themselves automatically. It also allows for a form of performance art.
You're missing it. So they're an exception. So we meet Léa Seydoux and Viggo Mortensen, who are performance artists. His unique power is the fact that he is generating the organs.
Yeah.
And this is happening in a context where pain... We're told this very briefly, but pain no longer exists. We're not told why... But we're told this in the first 10
and
minutes.
Also, sex, as we understand now, doesn't really exist, and so people.
But for them, no. I think this is the thing. There are multiple. They are the spear tip, because actually, when he does briefly have a tiny tryst with Kristen Stewart's character, and she goes to kiss him in this kind of conventional, I suppose, way, and he kind of shies away and backs off and says, "I'm sorry, I'm just not good at the old sex,"
implying that the old sex,
implying that the old world of average humans exists in this world of kind of these nascent superhumans, people who are generating organs. And I think what he's trying to do is anticipate this great leap forward that's happening to our biology, right? It's like this I.J. Good kind of self-replicating AI that will represent the kind of technological singularity when humanity will step from its current state, humanity 1.0 into humanity 2.0. And he's kind of exploring that space. And for me, it felt like he has always been interested in the penetrations between technology and bodies, crash, cars, whatever, existence, gaming, consoles, and human bodies. Now it felt like, for me, this is a question for you guys. It's more like it felt like he's spent a long time away from this, and he's created a film which feels like it would make sense with Necromancer and Gibsonite imaginaries of the future. It feels outmoded in a way.
Yeah, totally. I think the entire thing was in hoc to the set of references that a Cronenberg fan has.
Right.
It's the type of film that on one of his publicity tours for, let's say, A Dangerous Method or whatever else, an ardent Videodrome nut would be like, "Oh man, why don't you make a film about post-humanism?
Play the classics."
And then someone's foisting Rosie Braidotti's How We Became Post-Human into his hands, and then maybe he read it at some point over the last 8 years, or maybe he read it during lockdown, because it felt like to me it felt like a theoretically produced version of his earlier films. Like, it was mediated through
plus loads of jokes about bad performance art, which will also
but there was always the consideration of art in his films, though, and its relationship to the body, actually, and it's but
much more explicitly here, and I think it will play to those kind of Goldsmiths.
It's just totally on the wavelength of the kind of post-humanist, cybernaut, neo-90s revival kind of long black trench coat and body modification.
The performance artist covered in ears, for example, with his mouth stitched up, his eyes closed.
Quite a squeamish film.
What I liked most about it, though, is that this character, this hooded performance artist who's feeble because of his extensive body modification experiments, and because of his unexplained gift for producing new organs, right? So he may well be the kind of Mahdi of the new evolutionary stage. He is also deeply neurotic and insecure about his own praxis, and kind of keeping an eye on what the surrounding community of body artists are up to. And I like this touch personally.
It's quite nice.
Like he's kind of a one sequence when we see the body artist who's covered in ears. He's just kind of crouching nervously in a corner, like taking notes, and
like people often do at openings.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a welcome.
But you're right about that, because there is a moment when there is a unofficial government organization, basically, whose job is to register new organs. So it's
the new Vice Squad.
The new Vice Squad, or they're a subsidiary of that. And he actually, I believe it's him. No, it's actually Kristen Stewart's character who works for that. She's a deputy in that department, and she does address Viggo Mortensen and kind of explains it, talking about his practice, and kind of says, well, you're just the body that gets dissected. So it's actually Léa Seydoux who's the artist. Is what it sounds like. They look at her drawings.
Some intellectual property things.
Yeah, so he's kind of aware of it. And his nervousness is also maybe a kind of a lack in terms of his own creative practice. He's aware he's just a corpse that's being prodded and.
Richard Brody in The Failing New Yorker said that this was comparable to the relationship between the artist and between the director and the actress.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious.
That.
Yeah. That's a pretty fair take.
But it is, I think to quickly go over some, there is a lot of boredom. There's a lot of kind of exposition that's grasping towards being very profound. These kind of in these kind of dark, murky rooms. There's a few narratives that are introduced. There's other competing organizations. There's a rebellion that's rising of people who can survive only on plastic. They've begun to develop stomach organs that can only digest
I wish
plastic.
this strand had been
the thing is
more,
the dialogue the dialogue is very expository, and it's quite exhausting watching a film that consists mostly of people in sort of dingy sound studios telling you what the world that is being built is going to
be like, and is made
the most extraordinary thing about Blade Runner that makes Blade Runner, and a film that we continue to talk about and watch and think about, is that in the opening shots you see the world, I know it must have cost a huge amount of money to create that world, but you see cars zooming in and out. It becomes quite theatre-like.
The guttering, spewing pyramids of the new LA. Yeah,
exactly. You see a huge amount of landscape. There isn't very much landscape in it. I mean, it starts with a landscape shot, granted, but it doesn't kind of give you a global view.
There aren't any large establishing landscape shots.
No,
actually.
it's all very.
Apart from the ship at the start.
It's very intimate. It's very. I mean, you're right, because Blade Runner gives you the outer worlds. It gives you a kind of. And it doesn't spend that long expositioning. It kind of says, okay, there's people. There are androids who are returning to Earth. It gives you enough to be able to understand the landscape.
But crucially, like any good script, you learn the exposition through action. You learn what the world is through things immediately happening that are complex and challenging. And that doesn't happen here in this film. And it's weird because he's such an experienced director, and you'd think there'd be loads of consultants hovering around, putting stuff in his final draft document. But he literally is explaining the world through loads of boring scenes of dialogue where people
somebody arrives and tells us, in this world this happens, in this world people can't feel pain
things that
anymore.
would be taken for granted in the context, because people live that
it's
reality.
It's so easy to show that somebody can't feel pain anymore.
You could do a scene where that
you don't need a bloke to arrive and be like, in this film nobody can feel pain.
But they also do kind of fudge that as well, because you see they explain that, but Viggo Mortensen is in a constant state of pain. He's coughing, he's moving his throat around, he's choking, he's like he's dying from stage 4 cancer or something. He's completely ill and unwell. It's like you've made this whole point about people being completely post pain and objection, and yet people seem to be constantly in this state of kind of torpor and unease. And that for me felt like a kind of dissonance in the film. It's like they didn't feel like the posthumans.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Cronenberg nut by any measure, but I did find this certainly I think it wanted to be like a late career fugue, a late style sort of reflection and consummation of his earlier stuff, but it actually struck me instead as a kind of shallow sop to his fan base.
Yeah,